Welcome back, Lore Masters, students, and educators of the Force, and welcome back to the archives. I have been expecting you. Recently, we have been doing a lot of lore revolving around the Sith Lords. The Sith Lords being personally my favourite topic in all of Star Wars. The Sith as the tyrannical, force-wielding sect that manipulated the dark side, perpetually fighting against their light side counterparts, the Jedi Order, that were spawned from the Jedi Order themselves in the first and later second Great Schisms. The Jedi Order has experienced 7 great schisms over the centuries and even millennia. However, today, we are going to be exploring the most notorious of all of them, and the one that literally branched off into the foundation of the Sith Order, the Second Great Schism. The Second Great Schism, which saw a battalion of Dark Lords start the century-long crusade known as the 100-Year Darkness, which spawned numerous amounts of conflicts and caused the Jedi to make their most dangerous mistake. Starting off, we have to acknowledge and explore the actual information regarding the Second Great Schism. Not much is actually known about the Second Great Schism, so we'll have to go off what we have. The Second Great Schism was a divisive split and divide among the ranks of the Jedi Order that occurred in the years 7003 BBY. Jedi who practiced alchemy and the dark side of the Force's Dark Jedi broke out from the Jedi Order, and the war known as the 100-Year Darkness followed in 7000 BBY after being exiled by their brothers from the Order. So, let us look briefly at the 100-Year Darkness before looking at the one man himself, the first Sith, the man who started it all. The 100-Year Darkness, also known as the Second Great Schism, was a conflict that began in 7000 BBY and lasted until approximately 6900 BBY, when a group of Dark Jedi defectors created monstrous armies and leviathans to battle the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic. The 100-Year Darkness began 3 years after the Dark Jedi split with the Order after practicing alchemy in the Second Great Schism. After 10 decades of fighting, the Dark Jedi lost the war at the Battle of Corvus, but went on to conquer Korriban and founded the Sith Order. Starting off, we have to acknowledge that Ajunta Pall, the very first Dark Jedi, the one who started it all, is the topic of today's video. Ajunta Pall was a Force-sensitive humanoid male who was reached into a member of the Jedi Order. He underwent trainings in the ways of the light side of the Force and eventually attained the rank of Jedi Master. Through his intense studies, Master Pall eventually discovered ancient dark side tendencies that would become known as alchemy, the secret of creating and shaping life, a power that was deemed an abomination by his fellow Jedi compatriots and comrades, and subsequently, he entranced his students with promises of more power. The Jedi Order instantly caught on with this, and due to the fact that Paul was a highly respected master, let him off with a warning, but ordering him to cease his experiments and powers experimentation with the art of alchemy and manipulating life. Eventually, Paul, along with a multitude of other Dark Jedi defectors, including Karnus Mur, Source of Sin, and Lady Zozan, broke off from the primary Jedi Order and began the conflict known as the 100-Year Darkness in 7000 BBY, where Master Pall, as well as his followers, declared war on the Jedi Order, despite possessing significant power and almost succeeding in overcoming the Jedi on multiple occasions. Master Pall and his fellow Dark Jedi were defeated in the final battle on the war on Corvus, and were captured by the Jedi Order, with lightsabers pointing at their backs. The Jedi made perhaps the most fatal mistake that they would ever make in the history of their order, as they actually spared the Sith. They thought in their minds that the Sith had lost their way, and that these Dark Jedi, if spent time in isolation, would eventually discover the more purified path of the Force. Oh, how far the Jedi would fall. They, with lightsabers at their backs, they marched them out into exile. They were stripped of their ranks and their weapons, and were exiled from space, controlled by the Galactic Republic, into the depths of the galaxy. Master Paul and his followers eventually discovered Korriban via the use of the Source of Sin, who sensed a nexus and miasma of dark side energy and flew right to it. A planet in Sith space that was home to a Force-sensitive, pure-blooded Crimson species known as the Sith. Despite initial resistance, Master Pall managed to recruit the King Shadowhand to betray his king, and the Sith species soon worshipped him and his followers as gods. The king, Hakagran Grash, a Sith pureblood, was beheaded by Paul with his own war sword during their takeover of the barren wasteland of Korriban. They knew their situation was not ideal, but it was all they had, so they would have to make the most of it. The Sith's purebloods hailed them as gods, and as swords of sin began to plunder the tombs of the ancient Dark Lords. Zozan created 3 great amulets, one for Remulus Draper, one for herself, and one for Carnus Mur. Ajunta Pall reigned as the first ever Dark Lord of the Sith. He founded the first Sith Empire and dominated the planet of Zyos, served as the first Dark Lord of the Sith for many decades. After his physical demise, Master Pall's spirit perished within his tomb, persisting as it continued to ebb from the flows of time, having attached its soul to the physical world through his knowledge and mastery of alchemy rivaling that of the greatest of his day. Over the centuries, he began to question his actions as a Sith Lord due to the fact that the Sith was often destroyed by battling each other and infighting. He thought that the Sith were far more powerful than the Jedi, as rather than restricting themselves to one length of the Force, they were willing and ready to accept all areas of it, and truly devote themselves to their studies and the mysticism that the Force entailed, something that the Sith personally had in spades: power. They had it in tremendous amounts. And while Ajunta Pall saw that the Sith were far more powerful than the Jedi, they constantly were torn apart by infighting. Eventually, Ajunta came to regret his actions and regretted ever defecting from the Dark Jedi Order and defecting from the Jedi and becoming Dark Jedi, as well as the Jedi, First Lords of the Sith. Millennia later, during the Jedi Civil War, Jedi Knight Revan entered Master Pall's tomb to retrieve his magnificent war blade that had beheaded the king of Hakkaran Grash. Master Pall appeared as a ghostly apparition and spoke of his actions and regret as a Sith, with disappointment and shame. He explained how the Sith caused their own destruction time and time again and led their order to the brink of extinction. Revan removed the blade and convinced Master Pall to turn away from the dark side and return to the light side after so many millennia of torment. After letting go of his pain and anguish, Master Pall returned to the light, becoming one with the Force, finding peace at long last. In conclusion, Ajunta Pall's legacy as the first Dark Lord of the Sith lives on, but his story is one of caution and regret. He learned the consequences of the dark side, and he knew that infighting was the ultimate thing that tore the Sith apart. And if he could have done it differently, he would have done it all over again. He knew the importance of turning away from the dark side, as it was something he ultimately had to do. However, there is one thing I'd like to add. How does Ajunta Pall stack up to the more formidable beings in Star Wars continuity? Ajunta Pall was exceptionally formidable Sith Lord, whether he was the most powerful of his day. We can likely assume he was above the likes of Zozan and the Swords of Sin. However, I would argue that Carnus Mur, at least later in life, would achieve a higher rank of power than Ajunta. Ajunta was so powerful that the native Sith purebloods acknowledged him as a former manifestation and reincarnation of Typhogem, something they had never acknowledged since the birth of King Adas, the prophesied Sith Ari, or chosen being in their mythology. Ajunta Pall is certainly an incredibly formidable Sith, but does he stack up to the most powerful of all time? I would say no. I would say that Ajunta Pall was much powerful in his day, and I'd say he's probably the most powerful being in his day. However, as the Sith Order continued to progress, he continued to be overshadowed. Various Sith like Tenebrae, and even the weakest of the Jedi. I would say that Ajunta Pall would most likely be relative to a being like Mitra Surik, although I would put him slightly above. Mitra Surik, with her unique status as a Force wound, would obviously be an incredibly formidable opponent for Ajunta Pall, but I would side with Pall per his knowledge of alchemy. So my acolytes, what did you think of this video? I'll see you in a galaxy far, far away. And remember, the Force will be with you, no matter how tyrannical and dark the path ahead of you may seem.